Okay, so we're going to do some metaphysics today, and I'm going to actually take us back to the philosophical tradition and start with something in John Locke, since it's highly relevant to what Kripke is doing. Locke writes this long work, an essay concerning human understanding. This is just the second volume. And in book 3, he does something really quite new in philosophy, or at least new in modern philosophy. It hadn't been done for a long time. He writes an entire book of the essay on language. And chapter 6 of that is on the names of substances. So he begins by saying the common names of substances, as well as other general terms, stand for sorts, which is nothing else but the being made signs of such complex ideas, wherein several particular substances do or might agree, by virtue of which they are capable of being comprehended in one conception and signified by one name. So the thought is that a common name of a substance is something that stands for a sort. Let's think about common names of substances. We're thinking here of, well, common nouns. And some of these, at any rate, are names of substances, he says. So they stand for a sort. Now, what kind of thing does he have in mind? What is a sort? Well, forget the stuff about complex ideas for the moment. He gives a few examples. But primarily, he goes on to talk about two senses of essence. That is really going to be what interests us. The measure and boundary of each sort or species, whereby it is constituted that particular sort, and distinguished from others, is that we call its essence, which is nothing but the abstract idea to which the name is annexed. So, by virtue of what do we distinguish a certain class of objects as falling under this sort? The sort is really the kind, it's the type. Okay, it's not just to be identified with this class of objects, but nevertheless there is something that establishes this boundary, that tells us what goes inside and is a member of the sort, and what is outside. What is that? Well, it's the essence. And what is this essence? Well, he refers to it as an abstract idea, but again we're going to sort of put the way of ideas here to the side a little bit, so that everything contained in that idea is essential to that sort. This, though it be all the essence of natural substances that we know, or by which we distinguish them into sorts, yet I call it by a peculiar name, the nominal essence, to distinguish it from the real constitution of substances upon which depends this nominal essence, and all the properties of that sort, which therefore has been said, may be called the real essence. So, we have something that determines this boundary. It's the essence, but he says really there are two senses of essence. We've got the nominal essence. That's how we decide what falls under the term. So for example, let's take the name of a substance. The very first example he gives us is gold. So here is a name of a substance, the word gold. It's a common noun. It's a natural kind term as well. It establishes a sort. And so this determines the class of things that are golden. And now we've got something that is determining this boundary. He refers to that as the nominal essence. But now notice what it's doing. It's nominal because it's determining the boundary of not the things that are gold, so much as the extension of this term gold. So he refers to this as in some way connected to the content of an abstract idea. And it's how we, in effect, go about establishing what falls under the class and what doesn't. But he says there's another question that we can ask, which is, what is the real character of the things falling under this? There is, he says, something. Now, here's a gold ring, let's say. Here's a golden statue. Okay. Wow, terrible statue. And what else is made of gold? Oh, maybe a coin over here. And, there are certain desserts in New York where they take a little gold flake and put it under the dessert. So you're eating gold as you eat your mousse or what have you. I don't know why someone would think, oh yes, I'll spend $1,000 on dessert so that I can have these indigestible gold flakes that I will eat. But in any event, if you're decadent enough, I suppose you can do that. And whatever else is gold goes into this class. Maybe here's a necklace, a little pendant, and so on. Okay, so now there is something that actually makes these gold. That is the real essence of gold. And this is the real internal constitution of gold. Its real scientific essence. So Locke's idea is that for many of these natural kind terms that we have, for lots of these common nouns, names of substances, we've got some kind of characterization we attach to the name, which helps us to determine in practice what in fact falls under there. But then we've got the real essence, the internal constitution of the thing that really makes them what they are. Now, in a sense, this distinction goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle talked about essences in different senses. And so when he's characterizing essence, even though he uses the same term and treats these all as equivalent, sometimes he speaks of the essence as the thing that corresponds to the definition of the term. And that would be precisely what Locke means by phenomenal essence. That is also something that Aquinas would have referred to as the quiddity, the whatness of the thing that is something like the definition of the term, but in the object itself. The set of properties in the object that correspond to the definition of the term. But then Aristotle also talks about the essence as what makes it what it is. Whatever it is that makes gold gold. And that really is its real internal constitution. Aquinas talks about this as the nature of the thing. Now, both Aristotle and Aquinas, although Aquinas notices the difference between these conceptions, and Aristotle doesn't really seem to, before the scientific revolution, it was easy to think, oh, what makes gold gold is just the set of properties that are associated with the term gold. But after the scientific revolution, Locke realizes these can be quite different. And so, suppose I asked you for a definition of gold. Now, pre-scientific revolution, just sort of a common-sensey characterization of what gold is. What would you say?
Things that look golden.
Things that look golden. Well, it could be things that look golden. That's not great. I mean, think about a Steeler uniform, okay? It might look golden, but on the other, except for those horrible bumblebee things. You know, those throwback uniforms a lot of NFL teams have started wearing, and sometimes they're nice, and often they're just hideous. And even though I'm a Steeler fan, the Steeler bumblebee uniforms are like the worst uniforms I've ever seen. I actually can't watch them when they've got those uniforms on. It's just too distracting. It's really awful. But in any event, yeah, I mean, their pants might be golden, let's say. On the other hand, or look golden, but we don't want to say they are really gold, unless, of course, we're referring here in some way to the color. But assume we're talking about the stuff, not the color of gold. So it's one of the properties we might put in here is that it looks golden, okay? But it's only going to be one of the properties. Presumably the ring is gold in a sense in which the Steelers' pants are not gold. So what else could we put into this? Yeah?
It's an inert soft metal.
Ah, okay. So we could say an inert, soft, and let's put in the color. It says yellow, but let's say golden. Metal. Or again, I'm meaning that specifically in the sense of color. Could be something like that, right? But now, if we think about the real essence, if we say, what makes it gold? Well, is this what makes something gold? These are properties of gold, or at least gold as we normally find it. On the other hand, you might say, that's not what makes something gold. After all, other things could be inert and soft, and golden in color, and metal, and not be gold. So, what is the real internal constitution of gold? Now you're allowed to use your scientific knowledge. What makes gold gold?
79 protons, I think.
Yeah.
So 79?
Yeah, good. It's atomic number 79. That's what makes something gold. And so now we can say, aha, these things are rather different. That's really the internal, the real essence of the thing. By the way, Locke, at the time he's writing, thinks these may be unknowable. He's not sure we'll ever get to the point of actually uncovering these. But that's because he's writing about 50 years before the advent of modern chemistry. And so, at the time, it seemed like just a vain hope to think we'd ever really get to the real internal constitution of things. But there, well, that's something like the nominal essence. And so in a dictionary, you often find something that amounts to the nominal essence of the thing. A good dictionary, scientifically literate, may well include this sort of real essence as well. We should be careful because lots of dictionary definitions don't even give us this. Yeah?
What's entirely the difference between these two? Because I get kind of conceptually why you would distinguish them, but I would think that you could just you could move having atomic number 79 into the other category and just say, well, look, if you find something that has atoms with this number of protons, you're dealing with gold, in the same way that you could say, well, if you find something that's gold, probably gold. I guess the only difference would be that you could say with this one, it's never the case that it's gold and it doesn't have atomic number 79, or the other way around. But then at that point, it seems almost arbitrary, since the definition started not with that, but with inert soft golden metal.
Yes, good. Once you develop enough understanding of science to actually have some content to this, now you've got a question, right? When you're talking about this and when you're using the term, which of these takes primacy? Do you in effect turn this into the nominal essence? That's really what the term denotes. Do these in some sense compete? And one of the things that has been a debate ever since Kripke is trying to understand just what to do in these kinds of cases. So part of what I want to do today is look at some cases where it might seem as if the real internal constitution is real essence and the nominal essence come apart. And we have a choice to make, essentially, about what to do. One thing to say in these cases is that the real internal constitution takes primacy. Another thing to say is, no, this takes primacy. Another thing to say is that we just have to decide which takes primacy in a particular case. And there's no way to decide that in advance. Locke didn't really worry about the question much because he thought that we weren't in a position to articulate these. But when science gets to the point where we can, then all of a sudden this issue arises. Now, by the way, why does Locke care about this issue? Partly because this, being the nominal essence, is a question of how we frame the term, right? This is arbitrary, in other words. This is largely a matter of convention. It is something that depends on our own states of mind. So think about a term like bachelor. Bachelor is not a natural kind term. And you might think there is no real essence to being a bachelor. It's just the nominal essence. We have criteria for identifying somebody as a bachelor, and that's what makes you a bachelor. There's nothing else to it. There's no internal constitution. It's not as if scientists could say, well, let's start taking bachelors apart. We'll kill them and autopsy them, and we're going to find a real internal constitution. There's nothing like that, right? It's purely a social category, purely socially defined. But in the case of these natural kind terms, it feels as if, no, it's not. This is something that is, in a sense, mind-dependent. And so I think Locke cares a lot because he sees this as mind-dependent. Here, the anti-realist has a case. But this is something that is mind-independent. Gold is what it is and has that internal constitution, no matter how we use language, no matter what conventions we adopt, etc. So he's a realist about these. These are real essences, and that term real is supposed to have philosophical significance. He's realist about this kind of essence, whereas he's somewhat anti-realist about this kind of essence. Yeah?
Well, you just said that gold has that property, independent of how we use language.
Right.
But if we call gold atom 78 instead of 79, it wouldn't be 79, right?
Well, sure, we could use the term gold differently. We could swap the names of the elements, for example. But again, that's the kind of linguistic change that, in a sense, we have to put aside. Because if we're allowed to change language around, then everything ends up being contingent on those uses of language. So in a sense, we're saying, suppose we continue to use the language the way we use it now, then we have to decide what's actually going on given that usage. But you're absolutely right. I mean, in another sense, it's utterly contingent that this term gold refers to that nominal essence or to an object that has that real essence. So that sort of contingency. And incidentally, we should be careful to preserve that. Putnam at least thinks a lot of philosophers make a mistake and forget that that part is contingent. I actually don't think they do, but it's worth reminding ourselves anyway that these connections are utterly contingent at this level. Linking these to that term gold is something contingent. But Let's just agree to that and then ask, given the usage, what else follows? Yeah,
So with common nouns, they have nominal essence, but not necessarily real essence?
that's right. That's right. So think about a term like bachelor. Bachelor is something that I take it is not a natural kind term. It doesn't have it still has a nominal essence, right? The nominal essence is just unmarried man. But if we ask about the real essence, it's just blank, not applicable. And lots of terms are going to be like that. So you might say, actually, here's a way of defining what a natural kind term is specifically, or in Locke's terms, what it is for something to be the name of a substance, as opposed to just some term that stands for some abstract idea. It's for both of those to have something in them. So a natural kind term, like gold, tiger, water, is going to be such that you have some kind of thing going here, but then you also have a real essence here. Both of those end up being filled. We can ask about the real internal constitution of water, or gold, or what it is to be a tiger, what makes a tiger a tiger. But we can't really ask what. Or I suppose another way to say it is the real essence, what makes someone a bachelor is just being an unmarried man. So we could either say this is not applicable, or I suppose we could just say it's the same. It's just exactly the nominal essence, because there's nothing else to be discovered. There is no internal constitution to a bachelor that makes that person a bachelor. Yeah?
Couldn't you actually distinguish them? And so the top term, unmarried man, contains something that does have a different nominal essence from its real essence, right? With man.
Oh, with men, yes,
And
yes.
so then you have in the top unmarried and then the nominal essence of man. And then in the bottom you could have unmarried and then the real essence.
Ah, I see, right, right. Okay, that's a good point. Insofar as, yeah, I wonder if this is always the case, that these piggyback on some kind of natural kind term. And so there's always some kind of thing that is being characterized in this socially conventional way. And so there is always some residual real essence. It's not what makes someone an unmarried man, but it's what makes someone a man. And so what puts somebody in the category where at least we can raise the question of whether this applies. So that's true. That's a third option here. We can say it's just, well, whatever is the real essence of the underlying sort, the underlying natural kind. In this case, man. Yeah, is that always going to be the case? Will every common noun sort of have an underlying natural sort? I don't know. It's an interesting question. Maybe.
More abstract nouns like justice probably don't.
Yeah, what about justice? That's a good point.
I feel like it's debatable if justice is a common noun in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. It just seems like an abstract noun, an abstract singular term.
I mean, something like rules would work though.
Rules?
Yeah, that would be pretty abstract and it would be hard to get a real essence out of that.
That's true. What is a rule? Yeah, what would be the type that would express? A rule doesn't seem a natural kind, and yet it's hard to see what natural kind could subsume it. That's an excellent point. So there are probably ones where this doesn't actually hold. I'll say if applicable. Yeah, war might be a similar kind of thing. Presumably that's not a natural kind. On the other hand, I don't know what the class of things is that would.
Well, there are things that natural kinds do, so is that... It's like rules have to be followed or not followed by humans.
Yeah, actually Locke here may be clearer than I've been. Because after all, these are supposed to be names of substances. And a rule isn't a substance, a war isn't a substance. So as soon as we move into the the realm of events or, well, whatever rule, patterns or something of that sort. It's much less clear what's going on. It's only with respect to substance that it would have any plausibility, I would think, that something like this, that is not a natural kind term, has sort of some natural kind sort that relies on it. Yeah.
Are there some substances that don't fall neatly into the category of natural kind or the other one?
What do you have in mind?
I don't know, what if you said something like child? Because that's a substance. It has some sort of internal essence, kind of like the age, but
Yeah.
that's kind of arbitrary depending on the culture, like when you call a child a child.
Well, okay, good, yeah. That could be something like young person. And then the person part might be the natural kind, and young would be admittedly a rather vague way of characterizing this. Married, you might think, is pretty clear. Are you married or not? At least if the social conventions are quite well defined, it may be clear that you are or that you aren't. Whereas young, gosh, you know, for years I thought of myself as a young member of this department, like until a couple of years ago, actually. And how was that possible? Partly because I'm deeply self-deceived, partly because we kept hiring these people older than me. And so it was like, well, I'm still one of the youngest, one of the younger members of the department, somebody who is still sort of, younger than the mean. And that was true up until my late 50s, I think. And that says something weird about academia, maybe, that you can be in your late 50s and still think of yourself as a young Turk. But anyway, it points to the vagueness of young. I just saw an article that said 60 is the new 40. And I thought, yes! In any event, this may be more precisely defined and really vaguely defined. And, think about a term like smart. It may be that only an animal can really be smart. So the underlying sort might be animal, but then there's a huge amount of vagueness and multiplicity and so on to smart. And so some of these terms may be more or less, even bachelor is weird. What do you do about common law marriages? Is this guy a bachelor? He's never gone through the legal ceremony, but he's been living with this woman for 45 years. Is he a bachelor? I don't know, right? It's sort of weird. So even things that at first glance look like they're fairly precisely defined may have these weird borderline cases. Yeah.
Isn't it a little strange anyway to take the real essence from the nominal essence, since real essence is supposed to be mind independent and nominal is mind dependent? So like in this case, just grabbing man from nominal essence, that kind of makes the real essence also mind dependent.
Oh, good. That's a reason for being suspicious of this whole idea in a sense, because you could say, wait a minute, this is supposed to be something mind independent. And so to just say, oh, in these cases it's the same, that's to admit the real essence of those terms is just not mind independent at all. And that makes it sound like it's not really a real essence, right? And the same thing here, if we're borrowing this sort, what's going on there? One way of looking at it is that, wait, the basic underlying sorts are mind independent, but then we can create mind dependent subclasses of those. And so that would be a way of trying to avoid that implication you're worried about. But another thought would be that there are all sorts of cases where we might create these classes where we don't really observe the underlying sort. And so, in fact, some of the cases that people have worried about in the literature have that sort of character. So here would be a nice way of looking at it, to say, look, it'd be great if for each term, whether it's a natural kind term or not, there is one sort attached to it. But what if that's not true? What if we have this category of things picked out by some conventional term, and then we're looking for the real essence of the things in here, trying to figure out what it is, and so we've got some criterion for using the term, whatever that is, but then we start looking inside and we say, well, wait a minute. Actually, they don't have any real essence in common. And so we end up saying, gosh, there are just a bunch of real essences that go along with those things. Nothing is really there in common among all of them. A case that's really like that people are worried about, is jade. People took the term jade and had a characterization of what jade is. What is jade in a sort of common-sensey way? I'm thinking about it.
Stone that's turquoise colored, kind of.
Yeah, kind of greenish, turquoisey maybe, stone. So you have that understanding of the nominal essence. But then people began studying jade in geological terms and realized there are actually two different substances that look almost exactly alike. And it requires scientific investigation to tell them apart. And so really there it turns out, there are two real essences. Real essence number one, real essence number two. There is not one thing that gets applied by that, or gets covered by that label. And presumably that can happen in all sorts of cases. Yeah?
Where would connotations go in this framework? Like, for example, jade has lots of Oriental connotations because it was heavily prized by, like, ancient Chinese culture, yada, 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 right?
Right.
So, like, where would, like, I guess, like, would jade necessarily be jade without those sort of, like, connections that they would go?
Good. Presumably that goes into, well, it's actually a good question. Does that get incorporated into the real essence? For example, gold is highly valued. Presumably that's not part of its scientific understanding. If people stop caring about gold, we wouldn't say, oh, there is no gold anymore. There's still all this stuff with atomic 79, but nobody cares. That's not, it would still be gold. And so if it's going to go somewhere, it's going to go in the nominal essence. So there could be two views. One is it does go into the nominal essence. We'd say inert, soft, golden in color, valuable metal, let's say. And the same thing might happen with jade in our nominal essence. But another way to look at it is something like the way that I think both Carnap and Frege look at this, which is to say, well, really, people have a characterization of the kind of thing, and then there are their attitudes about it. And the attitude is posterior, you might say, to identifying the stuff. One thing is this gold or not? Is this jade or not? And then, ooh, do I care? If I find out it's fool's gold, or if it's not really jade, I might think, oh, well now I don't care about it so much. And so the caring isn't part of what makes it that. The caring is something that results from our having identified it as that. In which case, this would have to be off to the side. So we would have the real essence, the nominal essence, and then we would have other aspects of the connotation that would have to do with emotional impact, various kinds of attitudes people have about this that aren't really used in identifying the thing. Now, they could be used. It might be that, the criterion really does incorporate people's attitudes in some way. I think that's possible. It probably doesn't with jade or gold, but it might with certain other things. Yeah.
You said earlier that Locke wasn't really sure if gold itself had a real essence to it. So it seemed like...
No, he thought it did have a real essence. He just wasn't convinced we'd ever discover what it was. He was a pessimist about the future of science.
Okay.
Yeah, because he did think it was a real thing and that it really had a real internal constitution. But he was worried about the possibility of ever being able to tell what... It's hard to tell in the essay exactly why he's pessimistic. I think it's that he thinks, in a kind of logical empiricist way almost, that this is something that depends on observation. And this is something that is a matter of the unobserved thing behind. And as unobserved, he thinks it may be unknowable. He really doesn't envision the possibility of a sort of science that postulates unobserved entities and creates a kind of theoretical structure that explains the phenomena in a way that allows us to say we've discovered what the real internal constitution is. So he doesn't conceive of the kind of hypothesis testing and the sort of theoretical entity that might be introduced by modern chemistry or modern physics. He's thinking of the old chemistry or physics where basically you're sitting back and just observing and categorizing. And he doesn't, it's weird because he's well aware of the atomic theory, but he thinks of it as a metaphor. He doesn't think we'd ever be able to be in a position of telling what the atoms are really doing. And if he had been, it was only, I guess, about 60 years until those theories developed. So he was just on the cusp of this, but couldn't yet see what that would even be like. He was scientifically trained, by the way, but he was a doctor. But he was a doctor. That makes it sound like a doctor is a very inferior kind of scientist. But think about what doctors do. They learn about the body, especially at that time, they learned about the body by way of observation. And observation of living patients, autopsies of dead patients, and so on. They didn't really have a theory of what the underlying biochemistry was. Okay, well, so we've been talking about a couple of cases that are odd here. One is the Jade case. There is also a famous case from Putnam, known as the twin Earth case. So let's talk for a minute about twin Earth before we move on to Kripke's use of this. Here is how Putnam describes it. Yes. For the purpose of the following science fiction examples, we'll suppose that somewhere in the galaxy there is a planet we shall call twin Earth. Twin Earth is very much like Earth. In fact, people on twin Earth even speak English. Yay! In fact, apart from the differences we shall specify in our science fiction examples, the reader may suppose that twin Earth is exactly like Earth. Incidentally, you might think, wait a minute, what do you mean they speak English? Even if they speak a language that is just like English, it would be weird that it sort of grew up independently of English, right? But let's forget about that. He may even suppose that he has a doppelganger, an identical copy on twin Earth if he wishes, though my stories won't depend on this. Although some of the people on twin Earth, say the ones who call themselves Americans, and the ones who call themselves Canadians, and the one who call themselves Englishmen, and so on, speak English, there are not surprisingly a few tiny differences, which we'll now describe between the dialects of English spoken on twin Earth and standard English. These differences themselves depend on some of the peculiarities of twin Earth. One of the peculiarities of twin Earth is that the liquid called water is not H2O, but a different liquid, whose chemical formula is very long and complicated. I shall abbreviate this chemical formula simply as XYZ. I shall suppose that XYZ is indistinguishable from water at normal temperatures and pressures. In particular, it tastes like water and quenches thirst like water. Also, I'll suppose that the oceans and lakes and seas of twin Earth contain XYZ and not water, that it rains XYZ on twin Earth and not water, etc. If a spaceship from Earth ever visits twin Earth, then the supposition at first will be that water has the same meaning on Earth and twin Earth. This supposition will be corrected when it's discovered that water, quote unquote, on twin Earth is XYZ, and the Earthian spaceship will report somewhat as follows. On twin Earth, the word water means XYZ. It's this sort of use the word means, of the word means, which accounts for the doctrine that extension is one sense of meaning, by the way. But symmetrically, if a spaceship from twin Earth ever visits Earth, the supposition at first will be that water on Earth means the same on the two planets, and so means XYZ. But that will be corrected when it's discovered that water on Earth is H2O, and the twin Earthian spaceship will report on Earth the word water means H2O. Of course, really, they'll presumably call their own planet Earth, etc., but forget about that problem too. Okay, and now, let's roll the time back to about 1750. Chemistry was not developed on either Earth or twin Earth. The typical Earthian speaker of English didn't know water consisted of hydrogen and oxygen. The typical twin Earthian didn't know that water consisted of XYZ. Well, but now you can see, they're just the same with respect to their own internal states. They're just the same in their usage of the term, and yet they're actually applying the term to different things. And so one is really referring to XYZ, one is really referring to H2O. So Putnam's conclusion is that meaning and reference aren't in the head, they actually depend on the world. Because in the head, you might say, this early twin Earthian and this early Earthian are identical. It's only the fact that they're pointing at different substances and referring to different substances that makes the reference different. So he says in this section, meaning ain't in the head. And reference is not in the head. That marks his view as an externalist view, meaning that these things really are not internal to the mind. They depend on relations to real things in the world. But now notice what's going on. You are the visitor. Here is Earth, let's say. Here is twin Earth. And now in these bodies of water on Earth, you find H2O. Here you find XYZ. But both are using the term water. And to put it in Locke's terms, the nominal essence is the same. It's this tasteless, colorless liquid necessary to life, or at least highly conducive to life on their planets, that is in the rivers and lakes and so on and so forth. So the way in which they would identify these is just the same. So the nominal essence appears to be the same, but the real essence, of course, that is something that is different. And so Putnam's moral is that the reference is different. They're referring to different things. So reference in particular isn't a function of the nominal essence. He treats that as a very significant conclusion. In a sense, it's already in Locke's idea. Because the nominal essence, he thinks, is something that's in the head. The real internal constitution is not in any sense in the head. That's something in the world. And in fact, Locke, in a way, stresses the point by thinking, look, we have no idea what this is. We may really not know what we're referring to, except that kind of thing. Okay, so let's look at Kripke, finally, and consider some of his examples. There are some big metaphysical conclusions that are going to come about as a result of his sorts of examples. So first of all, we get some claims about essence. How could a person originating from different parents, he asks, from a totally different sperm and egg, be this very woman? One can imagine, given the woman, that various things in her life could have changed. She could have become a pauper, her royal blood could have been unknown, and so on. So it looks as if all these divergences are possible. But nevertheless, it's hard to imagine her being born of different parents. It seems to me, Kripke says, that anything coming from a different origin would not be this option. So we can ask about these scientific essences, but we can also ask about the essences of particular substances. And here is one that Kripke is proposing. Origin. At least with respect to people, being you requires a certain kind of origin of you. Now, what about a table? Well, he says, we may not know what block of wood the table came from. Now, could this very table have been made from a completely different block of wood? Or even water cleverly hardened into ice, water taken from the Thames River, for example? We could conceivably discover that, contrary to what we now think, this table is indeed made of ice from the river. But suppose it's not. Though we can imagine making a table out of another block of wood or from ice, those would be different tables, even though they might look exactly like this table. Yeah.
Going back to the water example, I feel like even with the nominal essence, there are some qualities of water that are determined just because it is H2O, such as the polarity or like dehydration, synthesis, and hydration and whatnot, which wouldn't necessarily apply to X, Y, Z. So I was wondering that, is it possible for things to have different real essence, or in the same nominal essence? Well, with this example specifically.
Oh, well, sure. There's a complicated dynamic here, I think, really, to think about what happens. Because when you... Here's one scenario. The scenario Putnam thinks is right. These people go to Twin Earth. They investigate. At first they're saying, water refers to H2O on this planet. 2 refers to water. But then they say, wait a minute, this is different stuff. And they say, actually, so-called water on this planet is not really water. It's XYZ. So they're preserving the usage that goes along with the real essence here, even though they admit the nominal essence, which drives them initially, is the same. Of course, they could convert, and they could say, wow, now you might think, we've discovered a different kind of water. We used to think water was H2O. But now it's like jade, actually. There are 2 different kinds of water. There's H2O and XYZ. And Kripke and Putnam have to argue against that. But it does seem to me that's one option, depending upon how much we want to stress the commonalities here. Presumably in the case of jade, people have kept the term jade. They haven't said, oh, there's jade and twin jade. Yeah.
This isn't actually hypothetical. There are 2 types of water, one made with heavy hydrogen and one made with normal hydrogen.
That's true, it's heavy water.
It took a long time after the molecular theory for them to discover that. And heavy water is like important for nuclear energy.
Right, no, it's still H2O, right?
Yeah, it's still H2O.
So it doesn't really change the real essence, but yes, you find out within that there are some kinds that differ in chemically interesting ways. And so one way to look at this problem is to say, there's an interesting kind of relationship between these two. When we make discoveries here, it's not so obvious that the nominal essence stays the same. it may change. And in particular, it may change as people become aware of this difference. They start noticing these other properties of water they hadn't paid attention to before. They were not part of the ordinary common sense idea, but science starts bleeding into common sense. Putnam ends up saying, look, common sense defers to science in certain places. And at points that's true. We say, yeah, I don't know what this is exactly. It's up to the scientists to tell me what this really is. As we do with, say, tiger. We don't really ourselves start knowing what tiger exactly is in biological terms. We defer to the biologists and say, well, it's that kind of thing, and the biologists can tell you what exactly that is. However, at certain places, it really starts bleeding in. For example, now, H2O is simple enough and so on, but that probably is part of our ordinary concept of water. And so I think there is a kind of dynamic relationship between these that can be complicated and hard to trace. In any case, back to this. Origin is one thing that Kripke talks about here, but also the material out of which it's made. The fact that the table is made of wood may be an essential property of the table. The fact that it's made from this particular wood may be an essential property of the table. Now, there are a variety of others like this. I'm not going to go through all of them. But here is what I do want to say. We've talked about the fact that whatever we say about these things are necessary. But now, at the end, comes the big metaphysical argument. Kripke gives us an argument against materialism. And so what is this argument? Essentially in favor of dualism, against materialism in the philosophy of mind. He considers some neurophysiological theory of pain, for example. Let's suppose someone comes along, an identity theorist, and says that pain is a certain kind of neurophysiological phenomenon. Let's just call it C fiber stimulation. And so that's the underlying thought. Pain is C fiber stimulation. Now, Kripke says, actually, it's not so easy to maintain that kind of position. Why not? Well, he says, look, we're making a claim, sort of like water is H2O, which identifies what this thing really is. And part of his claim is that that kind of identity statement must be necessary. It is a necessary truth that water is H2O. It couldn't have been something different because that's what it is. Water is identified as that kind of thing, and that kind of thing is H2O. So it becomes a necessary truth that water is H2O. Now, it's still something that required empirical investigation. It's still a posteriori. But nevertheless, it's something that has a necessity to it. And so if this is true, he's saying, look, this would imply that it's a necessary truth that pain is equal to C fiber stimulation. But now he says, all right, we get a certain problem. The identity theorist would be committed to the view that there couldn't be a C fiber stimulation which was not a pain, nor a pain which wasn't a C fiber stimulation. But now he says, actually, this is weird. He says, in the case of the apparent possibility that molecular motion might have existed in the absence of heat, what seemed really possible is that molecular motion could have existed without being felt as heat, might have existed without producing the sensation S, the sensation of heat. In the appropriate sentient beings, is it analogously possible that a stimulation of C fibers should have existed without being felt as pain? If this is possible, then the stimulation of C fibers can itself exist without pain, since for it to exist without being felt as pain is for it to exist without there being any pain. And so he says, that seems right. On the other hand, it's not true of pain. To be in the same epistemic situation that would obtain if one had pain is to have a pain. To be in the same epistemic situation that would obtain in the absence of a pain is not to have a pain. And so you might say, here is the problem. Any pain is necessarily a pain. Okay? A pain has to be felt as pain. That's what pain is. And so it's a necessary truth that pain is felt as pain. On the other hand, it is not necessary that a C fiber stimulation is felt as pain. And so we've got this strange thing going on where there is a modal difference. Could you have a C fiber stimulation without feeling it as pain? His answer is yes. For example, you could be a zombie who just doesn't feel anything. These neurophysiological events might be taking place, but without the consciousness. That seems at least like an epistemically possible situation. But is it possible that a pain wouldn't be felt as a pain? No, it wouldn't be a pain. A pain is defined in terms of the sensation. And so he ends up saying that there is therefore a difference. A pain is necessarily felt as pain. A C fiber stimulation is not necessarily felt as pain. Therefore, there is a difference between pain and C fiber stimulation. And so we cannot identify the two. So materialism is false. Dualism is correct. The mind is not the same as the body. Descartes was right. The end. Yes.